Hello and welcome. My name's Simone Clarke and I'm the Chief Executive Officer for UN Women here in Australia. We're joining you here today from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to start by paying my respects to Elders past, present and future. For International Women's Day 2024, I'm delighted to be joined today by the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia, Michele Bullock. Michele, it's an absolute privilege and an honour to be sitting here with you today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Simone.
There's a whole lot of things we can go into in unpacking International Women's Day, economic literacy, the role of women in society, in leadership. But I wanted to start, if it's okay with you, just understanding a little bit more about your own personal career and your journey.
I actually started economics at school and I enjoyed it, but I was accepted to do medicine. And I came from Armidale, which is quite a small town in the country, and I didn't really like the idea of going to the city. I wasn't really sure that it was for me at 17 years old. And I'd liked economics at school. I'd had sort of the teachers there in fuel of passion in economics for me. And I thought, well, I'll go and do economics at University of New England. And that's really where it started. And I think I remember seeing an ad for what was called a cadetship at the Reserve Bank at that time. It was sort of an internship. And the concept, the idea of public service really appealed to me. And that's where it started. And I started full-time at the Reserve Bank in 1985 and I'm still here.
Phenomenal. And what a long and illustrious career you have had. But I also think as a young Michele Bullock, did you ever in your career trajectory or your ambitions ever contemplate that you would now be sitting where you're sitting as the Governor of the Reserve Bank?
Absolutely not. I didn't have any concept. And when I started, really all I was interested in doing was just doing a good job at what I was doing. That was my whole focus.
I wanted to take you back to September of last year when you were appointed to the role. What was that like? It's obviously something not many of us will ever have the opportunity or responsibility to do. What was that like for you in terms of your career?
When I actually took office on the 18th of September last year, I remember thinking I'd be really nervous. And in fact, actually I wasn't. I was surprised that I felt comfortable, but I think the reason I was is that I knew I had a great support around me in terms of the executive, in terms of all the bank. I'd had so many positive messages from people saying how supportive of me they were, how happy they were for me, and I knew that all the board members were really supportive of me. So I think even though I thought I'd feel quite nervous about the whole thing, actually I felt all of a sudden quite calm.
Fabulous. It must have been a nice transition.
It was.
I know that you're extremely passionate about economic literacy and what that means, particularly for women. Can we unpack that a little bit more in the context of the theme for International Women's Day? And I'd really like to get a bit more of an insight into what drives you in around economic literacy in particular.
I think for women, economic literacy is particularly important because I think it gives them some sort of measure of empowerment. I think if you understand a little bit of economics, you understand what's going on in the economy, you can listen to discussions about that. It just empowers women a little bit more, I think, to have views of their own, to perhaps take a little bit more control of their own life and their own finances. All these things I think are important for empowering women.
Yeah, I mean, as a UN agency that focuses one of our strategic priorities on financial empowerment of women, we certainly see the data around that and the fact that, you know, women who are able to learn and lead and control their own livelihoods really have quite a quantum impact on their own communities and how that then transpires. So not only in Australia, but it's important, obviously, wherever women are in terms of controlling their financial destiny and their livelihoods as well.
The only thing I'd add to that is that economics is actually around us all the time, and it's to do with your superannuation, it's to do with your housing, it's to do with decisions you make every day in what you save and spend. So actually all of us are making economic decisions all the time. We probably just don't quite understand that we're doing that, and that's why economic literacy is important.
I think for some, well, certainly for people like me, terms like economic literacy it can be a little daunting. But I think, as you point out, it's really about those decisions. And I quote you as saying, I read somewhere that every decision is an economic one. And I know that that's a position that the Prime Minister, the Treasurer, the Minister for Women subscribe to and continue to reiterate to the Australian community. Can you elaborate a bit more on that for me as well, around what that looks like for you on a day-to-day basis and the importance of that?
Even in personal lives, we're always making decisions. So I'm making decisions about what I save and what I spend, what I choose to spend on and what I choose not to spend on. All these sorts of things are ultimately decisions about costs and benefits and how you weigh up what they mean to you. And I know that I use my son as an example of this actually. He's not in economics, he's in health, but he's actually taken a great interest in economics because he's realised that, in fact, it's relevant to his everyday life. He's making decisions, adult decisions about all these sorts of things, and it's quite. And all of a sudden, he's taken an interest in it.
I think there's a lesson in there for all of us in terms of being in control and determining our own financial security. Just wondering if we can talk a little bit more about some of the change that you've witnessed in your time with the bank, particularly for women.
Through my career, I have found myself at various stages being the first woman at a particular level. So I was always finding, I was the first woman manager, the first woman senior manager. When I first started, I started with a relatively small cohort of graduates. We were only about 6 of us in economic, but 3 were women and 3 were men. So it was actually, even. But there wasn't a lot of women in the department. But I think the main change I've seen over the years has been the rise of women into the leadership ranks. And the bank now has got about 39% of women in leadership roles now, which is a big improvement. It's still not where we need to be. We need to boost it further. The only other point I would make too is the intersectionality, because in many ways I'm a woman, but I'm quite a privileged woman because I'm a white woman. And there are many women who are coming from different backgrounds, First Nations, they've been born in Australia but they're of a different ethnic origin. These sorts of women face different issues than I personally face, and I'd suggest possibly even more difficult issues. But I think if you can make progress on the gender, then I think we can start to make progress also on some of these intersectionality issues.
Absolutely. Whether it's gender, sexuality, spirituality, ethnicity, all of those things need to be taken into account around diverse workplaces. Interestingly enough, as I believe, you still chair the Inclusion, Diversity and Belonging Executive Council here at the bank. It's something, again, that I understand is near and dear to you. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and why it's important to you?
I am passionate about it. I think it's really important. It's important for the reasons you talked about, diversity of view and opinion. And for me, that's really important. In an organisation that represents the Australian people, we need to look a bit more like society looks. We can't be sort of one-dimensional. In addition to that, it's obviously very important because people come from different perspectives, and I'm always amazed when I speak with people that come from quite different backgrounds to me. The directions they come at things from, I think, wow, I never would have thought of that, So that's why that's really important to have that diversity.
Really interested in the conversation around leadership and women in leadership. I was very interested to note headlines around when Vanessa Hudson, for example, was appointed as the CEO of Qantas, and the headline read something to the effect of mother of 2 appointed CEO. And I read those headlines and I think it's interesting that that's the first thing that's been mentioned in those headlines. How do you respond to that? Because obviously you are the first woman to hold this role. What's your personal response when you see headlines like that where it's focusing very much on the gender as opposed to potentially the capability and the experience?
I'm sort of in 2 minds about it. On the one hand, I find it unhelpful because you're quite right, it's supposed to be the best person for the job. And I don't think you would have heard them say father of 2. On the other hand, maybe it's good signalling wise for people as well, because early in my career I actually didn't think much about the gender issue. I hadn't been brought up that way. I had never occurred to me that I might not be able to advance or do something because I'm a woman. It just didn't even occur to me. And as I got up through the ranks, and not because I suffered anything here, but I found that I was hearing more about this. And so then I felt responsible, and I felt I had a need to actually be a little bit more out there and saying, well, yes, you can be, you can do it. So I find those headlines unhelpful, but if you twist it round in the positive direction, you could say, well, that's a really positive sign for young women coming up through the ranks. Yes, you can do it too.
Our theme is Invest in Women and how that actually accelerates progress. And as a UN organisation, we look to the globalness of that statement, but also here in Australia, when we look at things like investment in female-led enterprises, we know that venture capital is fairly low in this country. I've been involved in conversations where they've talked about, pitching like a woman for investment funding. Have you come across that in your career?
Generally, anything we can do to increase the visibility of women, the visibility of the achievements of women, I think ultimately that does help everyone. It helps lift up everyone. So I'm hopeful that just as in time gone, women probably didn't run businesses in the past and now they do. So I think that we're going to get there. It's just a reasonably slow process.
Absolutely. I think, Michele, you've given us a great role model for young women to aspire to and know that there is opportunities for progression and also long careers within certain organisations and looking to the future about what that might look like for them. Just in closing, I just want to ask you a personal question about your hope for the future.
Look, I hope that we get beyond this fraught conversation, it seems still, quite frankly, about the gender politics and the more diverse politics. I hope that we can move beyond that and young women don't have to think about, well, if I'm a woman, will this impact me? Women, I think, and I myself found it challenging at times having a family and working. But my hope for the future is that becomes easier for women and that we do find a way to balance those things. And I think as we move forward in society, hopefully as the norms change, that will make things easier for women. That's my hope.
Absolutely, and I think we share your hope for the future, that is certainly taken into account. I'd like to thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you about international